أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed Satan and begin in the name of Allah who is most compassionate and most merciful. Allah says in His Quran, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. Indeed, we have created human beings in distress, to toil, to work hard, to struggle, to face difficulties, to face challenges. But He also says, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْأُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْأُسْرِ يُسْرًا فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ وَإِلَى رَبِّكَ فَارْغَب. He also says that after every hardship, there will be comfort. Indeed, after every hardship, there will be comfort and respite. And once you have found respite from your hard work, from your toil, from your struggles, from your difficulties, then do take time to seek the pleasure of your Lord. God also says in the Quran, Ya ayyuhal insanu innaka kadihun ila rabbika kadahan famulaqihi. God also says that indeed, O human being, indeed you are laboring towards your Lord with great effort. Indeed, you're working towards your Lord with great effort, and He will indeed see you, and you will indeed meet Him at the end of it all. Now, these passages that I have selected from the Quran are from different chapters, but they all together summarize one important philosophical point of view from the Quran, the holy book of the Muslims, which says that the purpose of our creation is not in sport. God did not create us for sport. He created us for the sole purpose of worshipping Him. And the manner in which that worship manifests itself is in our efforts to face the difficulties, the challenges, the distresses that we experience in this life. Now, for some people, those challenges can be profound. For people in Syria, for people in Egypt, the challenges are deep. For you, get your homework done and then come here and try to seek the pleasure of God. It is the same thing. You're just as stressed as they are, I'm sure. Nevertheless, transitioning to what real purpose of life is to face the challenges and the stress that we confront. This summer, I had an interesting opportunity. I wanted to travel through the Middle East on a spiritual journey. My son, who is now 14, his name is Rumi, so I wanted to take him to the shrine of the famous poet Rumi in Konya, in Turkey. So we went to Turkey, we attended some academic conferences and went to Konya. And then we thought that then we would go to Cairo and then meet with Sufis and mystics in Cairo and learn about the path of spirituality in Islam. But apparently it appeared that we were chasing protests across the Middle East. So when we were in Turkey, there were protests in Taksim, and I assure you that we were not the cause or responsible for instigating it. It was just a coincidence that we were there at that time. So me and my son attended and watched the protests in Taksim Square in Istanbul. And then we went to Cairo, and we reached Cairo a week before June 30th, the fateful day when the massive protests took place in Tahrir Square. And me and my son, we spent the whole day in Tahrir Square. We took pictures, we made videos, we posted it on Facebook, communicated with a lot of people in the world, but also spoke to a lot of people there. And to this brief talk, I'm going to share with you the conversations we had. So on the day of the protest, I primarily spoke with people who were protesting the Morsi regime. And through social media, I was communicating with the supporters of the Morsi regime and even people who were in the government in Egypt on that day. But before the protests, for about a week and afterwards, I got to speak with a lot of people, some of whom are in prison now. Some of them are very close friends of mine, like Abul Al-Ahmadi, the chairman of the Al-Wasat Party, who was the vice chairman of the committee that wrote the new constitution of Egypt. He is in prison now, and I wrote an article calling for his freedom. But what was fascinating to me was to see history unfold in front of my eyes. As a student of history and political science, we are used to reading about history in books. But this is the first time I saw it happen in front of me. And it raises a lot of interesting questions as to what is the meaning of what happened on June 30th. We all witnessed, at least through news, the subsequent brutal, savage death to democracy that was perpetrated in Cairo. Now, the events that followed afterwards, the fall of the Morsi government and the takeover of the military, kind of makes it appear as if we are back in 2010 as far as Egypt is concerned. The only difference is that Mubarak now looks younger. So instead of being 85, the new Mubarak is 55, which means he can hang in there for 30 more years with the same infrastructure to back his dictatorial regime. But what happened? What were these 2 years from 2011 to 2013? How do we understand that? Some of the key questions that need to be answered is, number one, is this the end of the promise of democracy that the Arab Spring brought in 2011? Does it mean that democracy has failed in the Middle East, especially in the Arab world? The second question is that are Muslims capable of sustaining a democratic society? And the fact that they managed to have it for just 1 year and then it collapsed raises all these questions. And of course, there are also empirical questions as to what about the economic and other sufferings of the people. It's easy to answer these questions by saying, yes, democracy is culturally alien to the Arab world and to the Muslim faith, and therefore Muslims cannot sustain this anymore, and you would be wrong. Because in other parts of the Muslim world, you will find that Muslims are developing democratic societies, like in Turkey, in Malaysia, and Indonesia. Pakistan, in spite of all its travels, has for the first time in its history completed a peaceful transition from one democratic regime to another democratic regime for the first time in 65 plus years. So what do we make of the events that happen in Egypt? I submit to you that those who concluded that what happened in January 2011 was the beginning and the end of the Arab Spring, the beginning and the end of the Arab Revolution, they are the ones who are perplexed. But if you take a long view of history and you step back and look at all the things that have happened in the last 2.5 years in Egypt and in the Arab world, then you can see that what is happening is the transformation of the Arab society. The removal of Mubarak was just one step towards the revolution and the transformation that the Arab world is experiencing. The resignation of one man is not a revolution. The resignation of one man is not a regime change. So when Mubarak left office, it did not mean that Egypt had transformed. The institutions that he had built for 30 years to stay in power had not completely changed. The military remains just as deeply embedded in the economy, and the police just as brutal and disrespectful of human rights as ever. So what is going to happen? I think that we are witnessing, for the first time, socio-historical change and societal transformation on television. And more importantly, we are all able to interact with it with social media. So imagine the period when there was the Protestant Revolution taking place in Europe. And you were in India, you probably would never have heard of it. And the only Indians who probably read about it was at least a couple of hundred years later. But now you get to watch it. Not only do you get to watch it, you get to take sides. So if you're watching social media, you would notice that not only was there a Tahrir Square in Cairo, but there was a Tahrir Square on every Facebook page. People from the Arab world, people from Cairo, people from the Middle East, the rest of the greater Middle East, even from Asia and the United States, were engaging and participating in these debates. One of my friends from Florida, very important and activist Muslims, we were on the opposite sides of what was happening in Egypt. I was very critical of the Morsi government. He was very supportive. And we kept arguing on Facebook. And then suddenly he hit me hard with something that I couldn't deal with. He said, well, just an hour ago, my brother was shot and killed in Cairo. So this revolution was not something which was like a simulation out there. It was happening to people. And even though I had now moved to about 10,000 miles away, there were near and dear ones who were experiencing the revolution that was taking place in real terms. So in many ways, there is a globalist character, a globalization character to this revolution. So not only is the Middle East changing and undergoing change, and we don't know in what direction it would go, but all of us, whether we are near or not, are engaged with this change, and so we are changing too. For example, you could all write a paper on the United States' relationships with democracy during the Arab Spring. If you remember, on the third or fourth day of the Egyptian revolution, Vice President Biden stood up and said that Mubarak was a great Democrat. And then 2 days later, we reversed our position, and then we were against Mubarak. We supported transitions in Egypt. We did not support transitions in Bahrain. We facilitated change militarily in Libya. We backed away from doing the same in Syria. So if you notice, the changes that are happening in the Arab world are also affecting our own political conscience as to how we have engaged in these important events in that region. There are two things that I would like to leave you with, and after that, perhaps I will stop, and then if you have questions, you can ask me. And those two things are that the revolution, first of all, was not about democracy. The revolution was not about Muslim Brotherhood. The revolution was not about Islam. It was not to establish an Islamic state. It was not to even establish a democracy. The revolution was about something much more fundamental and basic, which is human dignity. When the Tunisian set fire to himself, he underscored the profound hopelessness of the ordinary people in the Arab world. That life is so hopeless that the only way I can find a way out of this misery is to burn myself to death. And that triggered this revolution. When he spoke to people in 2011 and 12, and what is it that they wanted, while the elite were talking about an Islamic state and democracy and Dawla Madaniya, etc., the ordinary people were saying only two things. I want bread and I want dignity. I want bread and I want dignity. When there is hunger, there is no humanity. When there is hunger, there is no dignity. When there is hunger, there is no faith or even God. You can't preach to a hungry man. You can't call a hungry person to come and pray. First feed him, then lead him in prayer. So these are the two things that these revolutions were all about. Regardless of what regimes were instituted after the revolution in Tunisia, in Libya, or Egypt, whether they became Islamic states or whether they became democracies, they continue to fail to provide those two basic needs of the people of that region, is fundamental improvement in their economic condition and fundamental improvement in their status as human beings. And that is why, because it is a matter of human dignity, it is a global issue. We are all connected. When there are human beings on this planet who are less human than us, we also become less human than we think we are. And I think, therefore, that it is important that you, as young students, study this issue, engage with it. Now we have an easy way out through social media where you can pretend as if you are having a real impact. Sometimes you can have a real impact, but oftentimes it gives you the illusion that you are actually engaging in trying to change the world. But do engage the world, because when human dignity is at stake, we are all shareholders of that. Thank you very much.